There comes a moment in every empath's life when something inside them goes completely silent. Not broken, not angry, just done. Carl Jung discovered this wasn't depression or emotional exhaustion. He called it the final stage of spiritual awakening, and it terrifies everyone who witnesses it, because when an empath stops caring, they don't become cruel, they become untouchable, and that changes everything. Jung spent decades studying patients who reached this state. What he found challenges everything we think we know about empathy, spirituality, and personal transformation. The moment the empath stops caring isn't the end of their journey. It's the beginning of something far more powerful. Before we understand why empaths stop caring, we need to see what brings them to that edge. Jung documented a consistent pattern across his most sensitive patients. These weren't people who occasionally felt things deeply. These were individuals whose entire nervous system functioned as an emotional receiver for everyone around them. They walked into rooms and immediately absorbed the psychological atmosphere. Family dinners left them exhausted from managing everyone's unspoken tensions. Friendships drained them because they carried both sides of every conflict. Romantic relationships nearly destroyed them because they felt their partner's pain more intensely than their partner did. Jung called these individuals the emotional shock absorbers of their social systems. They didn't just empathize with suffering, they absorbed it, processed it, and somehow transmuted it so others could function. Parents dumped their anxiety onto them. Siblings used them as free therapists. Partners treated them like emotional support animals who existed solely to manage their moods. And here's what made Jung's observations so disturbing. These empaths never complained. They accepted this role as their purpose. They believed their sensitivity was meant to serve others, that their gift obligated them to sacrifice their own peace for everyone else's comfort. They wore their exhaustion like a badge of honor, proof they were good people who cared enough to suffer. The cultural conditioning ran deep. From childhood, they had been praised for being understanding, for making others feel better, for keeping the peace. Every time they suppressed their own needs to accommodate someone else, they received validation. Every time they absorbed someone's anger to prevent conflict, they were told they were mature beyond their years. This positive reinforcement created a pattern of self-abandonment that felt like virtue. But Jung noticed something the empaths themselves couldn't see yet. Behind their compassionate facade, their psyche was keeping records. Every manipulation, every betrayal, every moment someone took advantage of their kindness. The empath's unconscious mind wasn't just absorbing these experiences randomly. It was cataloging patterns with surgical precision. Consider someone who spent 15 years managing their family's dysfunction. They knew exactly which words would trigger their mother's guilt trips. They understood the precise emotional sequence their father used to avoid accountability. They could predict when siblings would manufacture crises to regain attention. They had mapped every psychological game being played around them with the accuracy of a cartographer charting familiar territory. But here's what Jung found most remarkable. Despite possessing this knowledge, they never weaponized it, not once. They just kept absorbing, kept caring, kept giving until something fundamental inside them began to crack. Their consciousness had become a detailed archive of everyone else's patterns, while their own needs remained buried under layers of service and sacrifice. This created what Jung identified as a dangerous psychological split. On the surface, the empath appeared functional, even thriving in their role as caretaker. But beneath that surface, resentment was accumulating like pressure in a sealed container. Not conscious resentment that could be expressed and released, but unconscious resentment that poisoned their sense of self. The breaking point always came from betrayal, not simple disappointment or minor conflict. Profound betrayal from someone the empath had protected, defended, and loved unconditionally. Jung documented this trigger point across dozens of cases, identifying it as the catalyst that forces shadow integration. The story repeats itself with disturbing consistency. Someone discovers their partner's infidelity after years of managing that partner's emotional instability, depression, and anxiety. The adult child learns their parent has been speaking cruelly about them behind their back after decades of serving as the family's emotional glue. The friend discovers devastating lies after years of carrying secrets and providing unconditional support. What made these betrayals so destructive wasn't just the act itself. It was the empath's sudden recognition that they had seen the warning signs all along and ignored them. Their intuition had screamed the truth for months or years, but they had silenced it. They had chosen to believe the best in someone who was showing them exactly who they were. They had betrayed themselves to maintain their fantasy of who others could become. This self-betrayal cut deeper than the external betrayal. The empath realized they had participated in their own exploitation. They had ignored their inner voice, dismissed their gut feelings, and overridden their boundaries to maintain relationships that were destroying them. The anger they felt wasn't just toward the betrayer, it was toward themselves for allowing it to continue long after they knew better. That realization shattered something fundamental, not their heart, their illusions. Jung called this the withdrawal of projections. The empath had been projecting goodness, potential, and innocence onto people who didn't possess these qualities. They had been seeing not who people were, but who the empath desperately wanted them to be. When those projections finally collapsed, the empath didn't cry or rage or fall apart the way everyone expected. Instead, something far more terrifying happened. They became quiet, unnaturally calm. Their eyes changed, not with tears, but with clarity. The fog lifted, and for the first time in their lives, they saw reality without the distortion of their desperate hope. If this message resonates with you, like the video and comment, "I am done." Jung described this moment as one of the most chilling psychological transformations he had ever witnessed in his clinical practice. The empath stopped performing emotional labor. They stopped managing other people's feelings. They stopped explaining, justifying, or apologizing for their own needs. They didn't announce these changes. They didn't make dramatic declarations. They simply stopped participating in the dysfunctional systems they had been holding together. Family members who had relied on them to mediate conflicts suddenly found themselves having to face each other directly. Partners who had used them as emotional crutches discovered they could no longer provoke the familiar reactions. Friends who had treated them as free therapists encountered boundaries where endless availability used to be. The empath had withdrawn their energy from the emotional economy that depended on their exploitation. And here's what made this transformation so disturbing to others. The empath wasn't angry. Anger would have been familiar, manageable, something others could work with or manipulate. They knew how to handle the empath's anger because it always dissolved back into forgiveness and resumed caretaking. This wasn't anger. This was complete indifference to the emotional games that used to control them. People around them tried everything to provoke the old responses. They manufactured crises. They played victim. They guilt-tripped and manipulated, but nothing worked. The empath had unplugged from the emotional matrix that once controlled them. They watched these attempts with detached curiosity, like a scientist observing predictable behavior in a laboratory setting. Jung identified this as the integration of the shadow. Every empath carries a shadow self they've been taught to deny, the part of them that's selfish, that prioritizes their own needs, that refuses to save people from themselves. Society had convinced them this shadow was evil, something to be suppressed and overcome. Religious teachings told them selflessness was virtue. Cultural narratives praised endless sacrifice. Family systems rewarded their self-abandonment. But Jung understood that this shadow wasn't evil. It was the empath's survival instinct. It was their psychological immune system trying to protect them from being consumed by others' dysfunction. When the betrayal finally forced them to integrate this shadow, they didn't become cruel. They became complete. The selfish shadow merged with the compassionate light, creating something society had never prepared for. An empath who could feel everything, but chose consciously where to direct that feeling. An empath who saw through manipulation, but no longer felt obligated to pretend they didn't. An empath who loved deeply, but only those who had earned access to that love through reciprocity and respect. This is what Jung meant by the final stage of spiritual awakening. Not transcending the ego, but integrating all aspects of the self into conscious choice. The empath had spent their entire life caring for others at their own expense. Now they were learning to care for themselves with the same intensity they had once given away so freely. This wasn't selfishness. This was self-preservation, finally being honored as sacred. The shift in energy was immediate and unmistakable. Where the empath had once radiated warmth indiscriminately, they now emanated something more selective, not coldness, but consciousness. They no longer leaked emotional energy to anyone who demanded it. Their presence felt different, grounded, impenetrable. They had become what Jung called selectively empathetic. This selectivity looked like boundaries to some and cruelty to others. The empath stopped responding to manipulative texts immediately. They let phone calls from energy vampires go to voicemail. They said no to requests that once would have guilted them into automatic yes. They stopped attending family gatherings that left them emotionally devastated. They ended friendships that had always been one-sided. They walked away from people they had spent years trying to save. But here's what outside observers missed. The empath hadn't stopped caring about these people. They had stopped caring about maintaining relationships that required them to betray themselves. They had stopped caring about being liked by people who had never truly valued them. They had stopped caring about keeping peace in systems that built on their silent suffering. The empath finally understood a truth that Jung had tried to teach for decades. You can't love others well until you love yourself first. Not the shallow self-love of narcissism, but the deep self-respect that refuses to participate in your own destruction. This was the foundation that had always been missing from their relationships. They remained pleasant but impenetrable to the emotional manipulations that used to derail them. The awakened empath becomes what society desperately needs but rarely deserves. Someone who can feel deeply without losing themselves. Someone who can love powerfully without enabling dysfunction. Someone who can see clearly without becoming cynical. They are love with boundaries, compassion with wisdom, kindness with strength, empathy with sovereignty. This transformation isn't a loss, it's a victory. Not over others, but over the conditioning that taught empaths their worth came from how much they could sacrifice. The empath who stops caring about maintaining peace in toxic systems has started caring about cultivating peace in their own soul. They've rejected the false narrative that goodness requires suffering and that love demands self-abandonment. The moment the empath stops caring isn't at the end of their story. It's the beginning of their sovereignty. And that's exactly what the world needs more of. Not empaths who sacrifice themselves endlessly, but empaths who have learned to wield their gifts consciously, powerfully, and selectively. Welcome to your awakening. You've earned this transformation through every moment you suffered in silence, and now you're finally free.